Hey, everybody, checking in early again because, well, we've got another heavy one for you. Our goal today is to break down what an oligarchy actually is, its key characteristics, and to take a hard look at whether those traits are showing up in our own country. We hope we're not overselling it, but much like last week's episode, the more we dug in, the harder it was to ignore the patterns. Now, we're not claiming to be the world's foremost experts on political structures, but we also don't think that means we shouldn't be having this conversation. These are our opinions, but they're not uninformed ones. We've done our research, and as always, we'll have our sources linked in the description. More than anything, we'd love to hear from you. What are you seeing? Do you agree? Disagree? Let's keep this conversation going. All right, let's dive in.
Welcome to Two Millennials and Mom, where we bring you engaging conversations and respectful disagreement across the social spectrum.
Injected with the quirks of everyday life.
Grow up as we navigate the complexities of this modern world with all the humor and warmth we can muster.
And the occasional gentle ribbing. We're glad you're here. Happy listening.
Hey, you guys. How are you this evening? We're here with Two Millennials and Mom.
Hey, howdy.
Hello.
So we're going to talk about America. And America was founded as a democratic constitutional republic. But is that still the case today? Or have we quietly become an oligarchy? But before we get too far into things, let's chat about America being set up as a constitutional republic and what that means. So I'm going to take an excerpt from Lee McGowan's A Return to Common Sense and read to you a little bit of how she describes this. I'd like to address a common talking point that, quote, America isn't a democracy, it's a republic. Because I don't think this statement means what people think it means, and it sets us up to fight one another when we don't have to. Yes, America is a republic, but more specifically, America is a constitutional republic. A constitutional republic is a form of democracy. Republic comes from the Latin res publica, which means public affair. It's a form of government in which the country is considered a public matter and not the private concern or property of the rulers. The primary positions of power in a republic can be attained through democracy, ruled by the people, an oligarchy, ruled by the select few, are a mix of the two. Now, we could discuss how much oligarchy is sneaking into American politics and public life, or how one party seems to be leaning hard toward autocracy, but in the context of U.S. constitutional law, the definition of republic refers to a form of government in which elected individuals represent the citizens and exercise their power according to the rule of law under the Constitution. So in other words, a democracy. A government theoretically set up to represent the will of the people rather than the will of the rulers. And we use our Constitution as a type of instruction manual that lays out the parameters in which we function. So going from there, we're going to begin our conversation.
I love that passage. And I have to say that I have gone back after reading that book several times to say, how did she say that? Because I think she does such a beautiful job of explaining it, of kind of making that case for who we are, what the intention was, and a quick kind of definition of things. Thank you, Lee. I am Politics Girl on Instagram, social media. She's fantastic. During our book episode, I said that I think that should be mandatory reading for all Americans. This is how our government works. This is what the purpose of it was. This is how the history of it has evolved and has changed. I absolutely, without question, stand by that.
Yeah, I agree with you. So let's talk about oligarchies.
Yeah, I want to get in there a little bit because she mentions in that passage that a constitutional republic could be democratic, ruled by the people, or it could be an oligarchy, or it could be a combination of the two. And so I really just kind of want to define oligarchy to get us started and then talk about some of the points under this definition of oligarchy. So an oligarchy is a form of government or power structure where a small group of people have control over a country, organization, or institution. These individuals may gain and maintain power due to factors such as wealth, family connections, corporate influence, military power, or political privilege. And just to give kind of a breakdown of what those key characteristics of an oligarchy are, is one, where the power in particular stems from. And speaking generally, it comes from wealth, where a few wealthy individuals dominate politics and decision makings, ergo a plutocracy, a subset of an oligarchy, or political connections, which could be specific political families or parties maintain influence, or military strength. Military leaders or elites hold control. Within that oligarchy, a small group of power holders, so a few individuals or families, control the majority of decisions and resources. There tends to be unequal influence. The rest of the population has little to no say in governance or decision making. And also within an oligarchy, that system tends to be self-perpetuating, where those who are currently holding those positions of power often work to maintain and pass down their influence, limiting opportunities for fresh blood to come in and hold those positions of power. And so with the some of the research that we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, like, you read this definition of an oligarchy to me, and I would say, oh, we live in one of those.
Well, and I think that it's really easy, especially as Americans, to say, oh, Russian oligarchs, that's an oligarchy.
Yeah.
We're not the same. And once you really start looking at the definition and how the political structure is currently in our present day, it's a lot more scary than I would care to admit, you guys.
It certainly looks like a transition.
That's a nice way to put it.
I mean, to me, I don't even know if I think it's just becoming more visible, in my opinion, in recent years. So let's talk about money. Last week, we talked about U.S. government debt and spending there and how crazy and out of control it seems to be. Let's talk about it more on the maybe extra governmental side, where we have seen over the course of our lifetimes, Callie, we have seen an increasing wage gap and an even further increasing wealth gap. And I just want to talk about what the difference between those two things are to me. The wage gap is essentially how much everyone is getting paid on a regular basis, your annual income, where we're saying, okay, I make $25,000 a year and Callie makes $75,000 a year and Mom makes $90,000 a year, whatever those numbers are, and how vast the difference is and how that is growing. So Callie did some math for us. The top 1% of earners in 2021 earned almost 15% of all wages paid during that year.
So 1% earned 15%.
1% of the United States population of working class people earned 15% of the money that was paid out. 14.6 to be specific.
Okay.
I don't know if working class is the right term there. Of individuals who got paid, well, because some people would consider there to be a difference between the working class and the managerial class. The managerial class still makes a salary. They're still getting paid wages, but a lot of people would not consider them part of the working class.
Of Americans who worked.
Yeah.
Sure.
My bad.
So, yeah, I mean, just, it's kind of a semantic deal there, but
Sure, a lot of this is semantics in some ways.
So, like I said, Callie did the math for us here. From 1979 to 2001, the bottom 90%'s annual wages grew by 28%.
I'm gonna correct you there. It was 79 to 2021.
Oh, excuse me. Yeah. 1979 to 2021, the bottom 90%'s wages increased by less than 30% over that 52-year span, 42-year span.
42.
We're in trouble, Callie. He's usually the one doing math.
Well, and the other part of that, Ryan was born in 1979, and if we start calling him a 50-something-year-old, we're all getting smacked. Sorry, babe.
Good luck. Come on, RP. I'm here. To display the ever-growing wage gap in this instance, the 90th to 99th percentile, that would be the top 10% less the top 1%. Their wage growth increased by just shy of 80% over that 42-year span. So significantly more than the bottom 90%. The top
Span.
same time frame. The top 5%, their wages increased by 136%. The top 1% increased
This is
by...
the one that is going to make you fall out of your chair. So if you are listening, hold on to your hats, take a seat. This is your warning.
Yeah.
I'm just saying.
The top 1%, their wages increased by 206%. Just to give you hard numbers, in 1979, to be in the top 1%, your annual income had to be $267,000. In 2021, it was $820,000.
And we wonder, that that's showing you where the wealth is.
And then to really kind of drive the point home on the wealth gap, which is a little bit different than the wage gap, because the wealth gap is essentially the amount of assets that people have, not necessarily their annual income, but houses, boats, cars, businesses, stocks, all kinds of different, whatever their assets, anything they have that's worth money that they could
In
sell
their
for
name.
cash,
Yeah.
right, would be part of their assets, which is what we would look at for wealth. There was a point that I saw while we were taking a look at this. The top 10% controls more than 70% of all of the wealth in the United States. The bottom 50% holds less than 3%.
That's a whole bunch of numbers to go, holy crap. I mean, and I don't really care exactly where anybody falls on the spectrum of that wage gap. The differential between the top and the bottom, between the bottom and the next class, is mind-boggling.
It is.
Yeah, and to really drive that point home, Callie sent me a tweet a couple of weeks ago, and it's a woman talking about Elon Musk spending $277 million on this most recent election. And so I went through and did the math. And if you take a look at the median net worth in the United States, I want to say it's just shy of like 200,000. It's like around 190.
Yeah, 192, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. So Elon's net worth is, the last time I looked, $412.9 billion. So if we take a look at the percentage of his net worth and we look comparatively, if he spent $280 million on this most recent campaign, that is the equivalent of the normal American family, the median, and not the average here, because there is so much wealth on the top end that the average net worth value is skewed by 10 times.
Hundreds of thousands of dollars, yes.
Yeah, like the average net worth is over $1 million. The median net worth is 192,000. So it's it's 5 times bigger than the median. So if you take the normal American family at the median there, where 50% of people have less assets and 50% of people have more assets, that is the equivalent of them going to Olive Garden for dinner and spending like $135. That's the same portion of their wealth that Elon spent on the election.
280 million versus $135.
Yeah.
Because of the percentage of wealth.
Yeah. Because of how much money 412 billion really is.
Well, and I feel like it's worth noting here, and we didn't bring this up before, but I think that it's worth noting here. since the election, there are so many articles across the spectrum of right-leaning, left-leaning, whoever you want to pick up. It is very, very well recorded how much Elon Musk's wealth has grown since the election. For the record, it's not quite doubled. It's increased by almost $200 billion. And what'd you say his net worth is, Cole? $412 billion? Just tossing that out there. Just for record number 2 here, footnote, if my wealth had increased by $200 billion, I'd be pretty stinking pumped.
Yeah, that would be way more than 200% for me.
It would be way more than 200% for me too.
So kind of taking that as our base layer here, I want to move over. Last week, we talked about corporate taxes and how we didn't think that they were paying their fair share. And this week, I want to talk about corporate influence and how, from my point of view, I kind of think that maybe they're providing more than their fair share of influence. So to kind of start us off on that particular path, I want to talk about monopolies and conglomerates and consolidation, because there has been a lot of that going on in the last several years, where these giant corporations just keep buying up smaller corporations and getting bigger and bigger. So with that, there is less innovation. There are less new products that are coming out that are creating new companies and creating new industries. And I just want to take a look at kind of the paper trail side of all of this and talk about corporate ownership and how it just seems to continue to consolidate and consolidate and consolidate. These people that have these massive asset pools behind them are holding, just like we talked about, so much of the wealth, and there just seems to be this really big concentration of that ownership, and it just seems to be growing. I was talking to the two of you earlier this week about these gigantic asset managers, the big 3 in finance, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and how much of the market they control. And it's not just like, oh, they own a bunch of Apple and they own a bunch of Microsoft. It's not like they just own these big tech firms. No, they have, when you combine the 3 of their asset pools together, they have more than a controlling stake in almost everything, thousands of companies.
But I thought it was interesting. I mean, it's not like they own 50 or 51%. That's not it. But they own enough of a percentage consistently of every organization, and those go kind of around and round. So they end up really having a control.
Yeah, I mean, they have enough where that they are influential on those corporations. We watched a video together the other day, and this was an older video, and they were talking about at the time how Jeff Bezos, who is the head of Amazon, holds roughly 9% of their outstanding shares, while the 3 of these asset managers hold 17 or 18% altogether. So they have more ownership across the 3 of them in Amazon than Jeff Bezos, the guy who owns Amazon.
Yeah, that's freaky.
Yeah, I mean, and it's, like I said, it's not just a couple of companies here and there, it's across the board.
Well,
If you're listed on an exchange, they more than likely have some sort of stake in your company.
Well, and like, that has to be kind of a hairy situation for somebody like Jeff Bezos. Hey, these guys who are not me and don't really know anything specific about my company and how I'm planning on running it, they have more of a controlling interest than I do.
Yeah, but see, it gets way more tangled up than that, because how much BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard does Jeff Bezos have? I mean, when you start taking a look at it, and you start taking a look at these big national banks, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, they all have ownership stakes in these asset managers, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. So they all own a big chunk of those 3, and then those 3 all own a big chunk of them. And it's really just this, again, this consolidation of wealth across this smaller and smaller group as you get closer to the top. And
I mean, they always say follow the money, and when you start following it, It is a scary place to go.
And that's just the part that's easy to follow. When you start trying to dig deeper, it can be really difficult to find some of this stuff to say, hey, what does this really smell like? So just real quick to kind of touch on those guys before we move on. Those three firms combined manage over $25 trillion in assets under management, which is almost equivalent to US GDP, which was like, depending on who you ask, between like 26 and $30 trillion last year, which is wild to me. The US GDP is equivalent to almost a fifth of global GDP. And these three firms have assets under management that are almost the same size. So the next thing that I look at here is, why don't we hear about this? Well, and I think a big part of that is because the people who are talking about it are little bitty individual podcasters. They're YouTubers, they're independent journalists who are doing it on their own. And the mainstream media is a part of all of this. When you want to talk about monopolization and consolidation of influence, you don't have to look any further than mainstream media. There are 6 corporations that control 90% of the media in the United States. I mean, this is everything from video game producers, television, movies, music. It's all under 6 companies. There are thousands of other companies that make up 10% of that market, and these 6 make up the other 90. And it just boggles my mind. I was telling Mom and Callie, I watched an episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver a couple of weeks ago, where he's talking about local news stations and how they're just consolidated under these massive either conglomerates or wealthy individuals. There's just one guy who owns, it was like 140 something channels, like local news stations across the United States. And he essentially picks their broadcasting. It's just one really wealthy guy who says, hey, you have to run these stories. And on this episode, it's literally a script, and it probably goes through 50 or 60 different broadcasters that all are saying the exact same thing. And it's this script that's coming from the owner of all of these news stations. And then he has his own segments that get played on some of them where he's just monologuing about whatever he wants to monologue about. And it just kind of makes you scratch your head and say, how did we, what? Who's watching this?
Well,
And
there was a big deal after the election with, I think is it Washington Post, that a cartoonist who'd been there for something like 30 years had put a cartoon in that was not complimentary of the incoming administration and Jeff Bezos. But this newspaper is owned by Jeff Bezos. So this cartoonist who's been doing it for 30 years had never, ever had a cartoon rejected. And they pulled it and said, no, we're not running that. So, I mean, all of a sudden it turns into this censorship. Well, we don't want to piss off our boss. We don't want to upset our boss. Or maybe it could be, I have no idea. I don't have any clue. Maybe it's the boss coming in and saying, you don't get to talk about me like that. I don't want to be seen in that light. And when they have all of the control and the ability to say, nope, I don't want to be seen that way, or nope, we don't want to rock that boat. Who gets to say it then?
Well, and we talked in a previous podcast about there's so many channels and so many streaming services. And when you look at it from that perspective, it looks like it's
the illusion of choice.
The illusion of choice. But then you come down and it's 6 companies running everything.
Not everything, only 90%.
Only 90%.
Okay.
But
sorry.
Just to, I strongly encourage you guys to go and take a look at this. It's hard to find. I read an article on it on the Motley Fool yesterday, which seems to be more up to date, but the Motley Fool also is going to have a little bit of inherent bias. But the 6 corporations as it stands now has changed over the last 10 years or so. By and large, it's the same companies that may have new names because they got bought or they bought someone else and changed their names. But the big 6 as it stands right now is Comcast, which controls all of the NBC networks, and Xfinity, which is the largest internet service provider in the United States. And they own a vast swath of local news channels and TV stations all across the country. You've got the Walt Disney Corporation that owns all of ABC, ESPN, Hulu, and Star. You've got Warner Brothers Discovery, which is Discovery Channel, everything TNT, TBS, CNN, and the Food Network, and a huge swath of everything under the HBO umbrella, which is a lot. There's a lot that sits under HBO that is
way
now
more than you think.
Yeah, way more. I mean, we're talking like Cartoon Network, and I mean, I don't even know the list, but it's a long one. There's a lot that sits under that particular conglomerate. You've got Paramount Global, which used to be known as Viacom CBS, but its name has been changed recently. So all of the CBS channels and programming, Showtime, Paramount, Simon and Schuster, and Pluto TV. Pluto TV is like a premium ad-supported streaming service on smart TVs where you can get just all kinds of content. All of that is under Paramount Global. You've also got Sony at this point, which a massive name in the video game and hardware world, but they also own a huge chunk they have the rights to so many different media franchises, but they also control the Columbia and TriStar Studios and Sony Music Entertainment. And
I wish that we still had CDs that you could go, because you could see on a CD really clearly, oh, this album that was put out by your favorite artist that you just went and bought, it was produced by Sony Entertainment. It was produced by so-and-so. It was produced by so-and-so Records. And you could really clearly see it, but you don't see it. It's not nearly as visible. Yeah. And part of that is just the form in which we get media and music. I'm sure it may be somewhere in iTunes or whatever it is, but it's not nearly as visible as it used to be.
Yeah. And then the last one here, kind of a newcomer on this particular stage, is Amazon. Amazon now owns MGM Studios and everything under its umbrella, United Artists and Orion Pictures. I mean, all you have to do is log in on Prime TV to see, oh man, obviously they have a pretty wide-reaching network where they either have ownership or license rights to all of this, plus the stuff that they're producing themselves. I mean, They're broadcasting the NFL at this point. They are a major broadcaster. And so when you have that consolidation of power, there are some older articles that you can find that go and talk about, okay, who owns all of these different media conglomerates? Who's kind of running them? And it's really old, really wealthy white dudes for the most part. And I mean, you've got guys like, it's hard to find in some cases. You've got guys like Rupert Murdoch, who owns News Corporation. So that's everything like Fox. And again, like this other guy that we were talking about who owns all of the local news stations, News Corp also has a vast swath of local stations under its umbrella, and they get to push out their narrative, and they get to put whatever spin they want to on whatever stories they tell. And it really starts to get mind-boggling when you start to try and follow that chain and how much influence is controlled by such a small group of people.
Well, and I think that the more that you start paying attention and the more that you start listening, the more you can start seeing these actions happening in front of you. And so Cole said something here a minute ago that I think is very true, for the record. I'm not trying to come at you by any stretch. But Cole said something about you don't really hear about these things. You don't hear about these mergers and acquisitions. And largely, you don't. But the ones that you do hear about, like, for example, there was one that Congress stepped in and blocked here 2 years ago, between Albertsons and Kroger. nope, there's going to be way too much control of the grocery market. That is really bad for consumers. We don't want that to happen. And Congress is stepping in, like I said, stepped in and said, no, we can't allow this to happen. If you're a business owner out there listening, can you imagine Congress stepping in and saying, no, you don't get to buy that company because that would give you too much control? And so those are the ones that we're hearing about. There was another one just recently with the Japanese steel company. I can't remember what their name was, sorry, and U.S. Steel. And it was like, no, we can't allow this to happen. The Biden administration blocked it. And so I'm not trying to sit here and make this some partisan issue, but I do think that it happens more frequently than we kind of give credence to because we're not really paying attention. Well, that doesn't impact me. I don't really care what that means and matters. Why do I care? Nobody's talking about that. And I think that those are the ones that we hear about because they don't directly impact these big, huge media conglomerates and these big, huge media corporations. So it's okay if we tell them about this. They're not listening anyway. Scares the shit out of me, y'all.
And continuing on about the consolidation of wealth and the consolidation of influence, we saw at this most recent inauguration, maybe I didn't pay that much attention to the last one, but for Joe Biden's inauguration, was the oligarchy there? Was Zuckerberg there for that one? Was Bezos there for that one? Elon was here. The CEO of Google was there. Sam Altman from OpenAI was there. You have these big name, magnificent seven tech CEOs, if you will, that were all there for, why? What do they have to do with politics? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that if they're attending this inauguration, they have something to do with it because there are reasons for them to be there. They're adding themselves, injecting themselves into that world, into that arena. And to me, that's really scary. These are guys that have obscene levels of wealth that we talked about. Some people are saying that Elon Musk bought this most recent election. And we saw Zuckerberg did what? Paid $25 million a week or two after.
Fund.
Yeah, a week or two after as a settlement for a suit between him and Donald Trump. And then a week or two after that, he's at the inauguration, smiling and all buddy. And it's just, it boggles my mind that this isn't getting talked about more.
Well, and I thought that they were showing up and they were making payments kind of to pacify Trump and get on his good side so that they were stayed out of trouble or not quite have the target on their chest. But if you look at this wealth and how it all comes out, then that story doesn't read the same.
Yeah, it's one thing to pay hush money to say, hey, we're settling this suit out of court. Here's $25 million to your inauguration fund. Leave me alone. To me, it's a whole other thing for this concentrated group of wealth to be at the inauguration celebrating.
Well, and I think, is that the precedent that we want to set as a country? Hey, you can pay to not have a target on your back. Like, you don't have to just be a good person. You don't have to be a productive member of society. But if you can pay the toll, we'll just remove that target for you. Like, maybe just don't do bad shit.
Well, but that also leaves you, Callie, with what about the people who can't pay not to have the target on their back? We're leaving
cough, oligarchies. Cough. Okay. So I did just a really quick, really brief look up to see who was at the Joe Biden inauguration. And for the record, that was right after COVID. It was still very present in our culture. And so that inauguration was not quite what this one was. And the most notable person outside of politicians and past presidents, outside of those people who were actively engaged in politics, it was like Rosario Dawson, who's an actress, by the way, and Lady Gaga, because she performed, and Amanda Gorman also, who performed a poem there. There wasn't anybody else. Jennifer Lopez was there. A-Rod was there. Woohoo! like, I'm not saying that those people are bad or there's anything wrong with them, but I am saying I think that the concentration of wealth and the concentration of seeking power and seeking to keep targets off of their back was not there the same way.
I'd be interested to go do the math and take account of all the net worth of the individuals
collective
at that
wealth.
inauguration,
Yeah.
and see how much of the United States' wealth was concentrated in that room.
Yeah.
That
Oh,
would
yeah.
be an interesting thing to look at.
I think those numbers would be scary.
Yeah. So we've talked about power sources, wealth. We haven't quite got into the political power sources part yet. But we've alluded to a small group of power holders here. There's a point that I want to talk about on this definition of what is an oligarchy about unequal influence. The rest of the population has little to no say in governance or decision making. Well, to kind of lead into what I want to get to next, I don't know how aware everyone is about Citizens United. Citizens United was a court case, I want to say back in like 2010, late aughts, early teens, where essentially decades of campaign finance rules essentially got turned on their heads, where the U.S. Supreme Court determined that corporations would, if they restricted the amount of money that a corporation could donate to a political campaign, it was a violation of that corporation's First Amendment rights. And so now corporations, as long as they're not giving directly to the candidate, they're donating to a political action committee or something along those lines, they can donate an unlimited amount of funds to a political campaign, which, when we talk about the consolidation of wealth, to me, that really sounds like if you have the money, you're allowed to buy campaigns as long as you're not funneling that money directly to the candidate. You can do to the candidate's adjacents and people that are helping the candidate, you just can't give it directly to them. And this has been a very controversial and contentious topic for about 15 years now. But I mean, it's kind of put a price on political power.
This is also really when super PACs came into being too, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is essentially what created the term super PAC.
Somebody had to manage all that money to make sure it didn't go directly, but it was still utilized.
And I feel like since then, and it's not something that, I mean, and I was a really dumb kid in 2010, and I don't even remember hearing about it hardly. But since then, I've done a little bit of research in it, and it's pretty evident that you can see how much impact this new ability to flood these campaigns with cash has just drastically changed the American political landscape. And it really just boggles my mind. And so go ahead.
I was just going to say, well, and even the fact that it was called Citizens United and then that's what is reversed scares me. Like, so if it's not Citizens United, who is it for? Who, like, that's, I mean, the whole purpose of this, like, who gets to benefit from these policies being reversed? Who gets to benefit from all of this money?
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing about these political action committees. They can name themselves whatever they want to. Citizens United could be for slavery. They can have their own political agenda, and they all have these innocuous names: America First, USA #1, and so when you see an ad campaign that says we endorse Donald Trump, this is
Bought and paid for.
Yeah, bought and paid for by the America First Political Action Committee, or you should vote for Hillary Clinton, paid for by Citizens United, or you should vote for Joe Biden, paid for by #1, we're the best USA, hashtag Twitter sucks. I mean, they can name them whatever they want to, and they have these innocuous names that sound really good, but unless you go and do your research behind that PAC, you don't know what that PAC actually stands for.
And I would say that research is very hard to do, to find out really what that PAC stands for and what they support. it it's not just like you can open up, your web browser and Google them and come out with it's a very convoluted, and this pack supports that pack, and so the
It's just a
trail is
web.
very difficult to
Navigate.
track, navigate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I talk about the Citizens United case to talk about the next thing that I want to talk about here. And this I got from an organization called Represent Us, but they have had lots of celebrities come out on a bunch of different videos talking about this particular study. Well, this study from 2014 talks about the impact of sentiment of American voters on the enactment of policy. And they go through this study, and there's a bunch of jargon in there that made it pretty difficult to understand, but they have kind of a synopsis at the end of it. And basically what this study found is that regardless of what the sentiment of the American public is, we have a statistically insignificant impact on the likelihood of policy being enacted. That means that if 0% of the public supports a particular policy being enacted, it has the same likelihood of being passed as something that has 100% of support from the American public. Regardless, anywhere on that scale from 0% support to 100% support, there's about a 30% chance that that legislation would be passed. Regardless of what it is, we as the American people have a statistically insignificant impact. It doesn't matter how much support it is. It doesn't change the likelihood of that being enacted. However, it also concluded that special interest groups and the economically and politically elite have a direct correlation on their sentiment as to the likelihood of policy being enacted. If the politically or economically elite do not have support for a policy, it is significantly less likely that that policy would be enacted. If they have full support for a policy, it is significantly more likely that that policy would be enacted. And so, I mean, I don't know how to better talk about, how to better define unequal
Who
influence.
has the control? Who has the influence?
Yeah, unequal influence.
I mean, can
because
you imagine being in a relationship, whether it is a familial relationship or a romantic relationship, where you only had 30% a 30% chance of say? I mean, mother, children, husband, wife, boyfriend, girl, whatever it is. Can you imagine only having 30% chance of maybe your opinion matters? That you guys, that is the inner workings of an abusive relationship.
But that kind of leads us into my last example that seems to line up pretty clearly with this definition of an oligarchy, talking about it being self-perpetuating. How those individuals that are in power continue to do everything to maintain that those and their allies maintain those positions of power. And that's the clear level of nepotism within the Beltway, within these positions of power, corporately speaking. I mean, you have CEOs that are bouncing from company to company to company. You have C-suites in general that they may move between companies, but they all know each other and they're all doing and working towards similar goals. You've got the lobbyists in Washington, which has largely become a revolving door. Those lobbyists get paid by the Mark Zuckerbergs and Jeff Bezos and Elon Musks of the world and these big corporate conglomerates to talk to the representatives, policymakers, legislators to get laws passed or rules, regulation that would be to their advantage. Well, do you know who those lobbyists are? Because a lot of them are previous policymakers. I mean, it's the same with the military-industrial complex. You've got generals and other military leadership that is leaving the Pentagon and going immediately and directly starting to work for these defense contractors that they already have a network of individuals set up in the Pentagon. And while I'm like, networking is great, but also when you're using your network to take advantage of a system that has already made you fat, and you do everything in your power to prevent anyone else from utilizing that system, that gets really nasty.
Cough, cough. Oligarchy. Cough, cough.
So, I mean, we've kind of run through that definition of oligarchy. The only thing that we've missed is military power. So I think it's safe to say that we are not a military oligarchy. But we've pretty much hit every other point in that definition on the head, to me.
Yeah.
That doesn't necessarily make us not an oligarchy, right? Like, because there are multiple kinds, correct?
Right. So when we talk about that definition, it's saying these are typically where the power stems from, one or a combination of these three. Well, we clearly have two of the three, and we clearly seeing them displaying symptoms or characteristics of an oligarchy. And like, really, to me, that study talking about statistically insignificant, I mean, we saw it with Roe v. Wade. What, like 80% of the American public thinks that should not have been overturned and should be enshrined as a constitutional amendment. But
let's do it anyway.
Yeah. I mean, it just absolutely is crystal clear to me that if that's not where we're at, that's certainly where we seem to be headed. And it just keeps growing. That wealth and wage gap just keeps getting further and further apart every year.
Yeah, who owns the dictionaries before the definition of oligarchy has actually changed and democracy has changed to represent what is current today? And oh, that's not what it means. We changed it.
Yeah.
Scary.
Hopefully that one was better than last week. I know I didn't have quite as many numbers for you this week, guys, but to me, when you start to take a look into it and dive into it, it's really, really eye-opening. There's a lot of information out there. Take a lot of it with a grain of salt. Check your sources, check your facts, but check them from 2 or 3 different sources, because it's...
And Cole, we had this conversation earlier. I am on the tail end of a generation that grew up believing that our government was there to take care of us and to protect us, and that it was good, and that the intentions were good. And y'all have kind of made a little bit of fun of me sometimes of not just jumping on the bandwagon of the oligarchy or other people being in power and how this is. But it doesn't take a lot of research to support what you're saying. And I'm going to be the first one to say, I'm struggling. I'm sitting on a fence almost between, not generations, but between thoughts of
ideologies.
Ideology, that's a great word. And not knowing. I mean, there's a little part of me that doesn't want to believe that this is where we are headed or where we're going. And yet, gosh, it sure looks like that's where we're going. And so I want to encourage our listeners to do the research, to really look at things and even to look at yourself, because it's been very difficult for me to recognize, entertain the idea that what I grew up with isn't the same thing as what we have today, what we're leaving our children today. And so I encourage you to check some things out. Don't sit idly by.
Yeah. And on that note, like, I just want to make sure that we put out there, this podcast is not only fun for us to do and sometimes really hard for us to do, but if you are out there listening and you think that we're wrong, we want to know.
We do.
We want to know. Send us an email
in the right direction, please.
Yeah. I mean, we were happy to come back and say, hey, we totally screwed this up. I re-listened to our very first episode the other day, and Cole had such a fantastic quote in it. Will you say it again for me? You know which one I'm talking about, yeah?
I never want to keep being wrong out of stubbornness.
We don't want to be stubborn. I don't even want to be right about this. I would love to be wrong, but sometimes the truth hurts. And so send us an email at tmanpod@gmail.com. Shoot us a direct message or a comment on social media. You can find us anywhere at tmanpod. I mean, we want to hear from you. We want to hear what it is that you think and believe and what you're struggling with and what you found. Let us know. Share your information, because if we can't come together to figure all of this out, what's the point? I mean, that's community. And my personal goal for this podcast is for us to be able to build a community of people who are passionate about living life and doing it in good, kind, wonderful ways, and sharing that knowledge and wisdom with each other. I have no interest in gatekeeping all of this.
Yeah, and not necessarily politically like-minded people. Like the three of us have very different ideologies, politically speaking, as to what we think is right. But that doesn't mean we can't talk about them and that we can't find some common ground to try and work forward. So even if you feel differently than us, we'd still love to hear your point of view.
Yeah, raise the flag.
And what you think we need to do. How do we correct some of these missteps, or what appear to be missteps? How do we fix them?
Yep.
Because that's the hard part, in my opinion.
And scary. Is it fixable? Can we do this? Or are we just doomed to be miserable and be at the hands of oligarchs?
So our weird thought is, because
Hit me with
we
your
were...
weird thought this week, Giggles.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So I may or may not have gotten fired up about something this past week and shot off an email to several of our congressmen. It's possible. It happens every now and then. But I reached out to people like Ted Cruz's office and said, hey, I am your constituent, and this is my take on this. It was about safeguarding public media, and kind of all of this that we're talking about, and not doing away with that, and not having all of that control be so concentrated in one specific place to safeguard it. And so I fired off this angry email to Ted Cruz, because that's my job as a citizen, as his constituent, and that's his job too, to hear us and what we want to say. And I get that it's a standard letter. What do they call those? A form letter back. And it was like, thank you so much. We are so excited to hear your opinion. And I got so mad. I sent off this super angry, and it wasn't horrible, but for me, it was pretty direct, we'll say. And for his office to come back and be like, thank you so much. We loved hearing from you. It kind of ticked me off. And I'm glad that he responded and didn't just let me go unread. Okay, fine. But also,
really? Is it different to be ignored than to be
It's better to be
patronized?
ignored than patronized.
Yeah. So,
I don't know.
I mean, I'm
is there
in the
not a
healthcare
better
industry.
option? Lesser
Yes,
of
there
two
is a better
evils here.
option.
There has to be a better option. I don't settle for patronization or being ignored as the only two options. So
No, I
Ted
think
Cruz,
there's
read your
another
email. Do better. But that was my weird thought. I get sometimes the things that we send are in direct contradiction with their stance or their party, and okay, fine. But again, we have to be able to have those conversations.
And I'm going to say that if they are in direct opposition, then you need to be educating me on why you are supporting that.
Yep.
Don't just blow me off.
Patronize me.
So, okay. Are y'all ready for a good news story?
Yes, I need some good news.
I was going to say, I need something good. What you got, mama girl?
This one is so much fun. This is how 8 furry engineers beat the bureaucrats at their own game. Are y'all ready for this? In the Beardy region of the Czech Republic, officials had spent 7 years planning a brand new dam, securing over $1 million in funding. There was just one problem. They couldn't get the building permit. Bureaucracy had brought the whole project to a standstill. Then one crisp morning last month, something incredible happened. The dam was done. Completed. Finito. And no humans had lifted a finger. The beaver builders, a team of 8 highly skilled and very adorable engineers, had taken matters into their own tiny paws. Using their natural construction talents, they built a dam out of mud, sticks, and rocks, solving the water retention issue for free. No red tape, no government delay, just good old-fashioned beaver know-how. As it turns out, beaver dams aren't just impressive feats of engineering. They also create lush wetlands, habitats for fish, frogs, herons, moose, even bison. They help with flood control, act as fire breaks, store carbon. Basically, these beavers didn't just build a dam. They built an entire ecosystem in 2 days. So while officials spent years tangled in paperwork, 8 beavers showed up, chewed on some sticks, quietly reminded everyone, sometimes nature knows best.
I saw this article. It was really, really cool, because the coolest part about it is like you said, they had spent 7 years getting the funding. It would have cost them over $1 million to build this dam, and who knows how long. The beavers did it basically over a weekend, saved the taxpayers $1 million, and they got the exact spot. They built the dam in the exact right spot that all of these human engineers had determined would be the best place to build it, and they did it in a weekend.
Isn't
I
that
also
fun?
saw that the human engineers came back and came to look at it, and they were like, oh, wow, this is even better than the one that we would have built. It works better. It's in better spots. Like, everything is even better than we could have even imagined.
Yeah.
I love it.
So
So cool.
I saw that one on Good News Network. There were also a couple of YouTube videos about it. It was pretty cool. Go check it out. It'll lift your spirits a little bit after a bit of a bummer of an episode today.
We'll do
And also,
something
we got
fun.
Mom to say damn like 4 times.
I don't think that's an issue normally.
I'll take it.
Love you guys.
Love you.
Love y'all.